Welcome everyone to Legal Insights, DEI for Real. Nancy and I are in our second year of doing these meetings. Today's meeting is moving beyond compliance. It's about neurodiversity. And a few introductions first. I'm Chris.Jones, owner and co-founder of Spectra Diversity, and we have the only assessment that measures the individual and the organization in the same survey. That's kind of our claim to fame. And we measure inclusion, which is definitely our topic for the day. And Nancy?
Yes, I'm Nancy Schick of Third Ear Conflict Resolution. I am a New York State employment attorney and global workplace mediator. So I have seen a lot of the missteps that people make when they're trying to navigate DEI. And Chris and I started this series when a lot of the changes were occurring here in the United States. So I think you'll hear me say it over and over that despite some of the bans on DEI, the law has not changed, so your obligations are still the same, and that's the other reason we continue to do this series. But we like to keep it light and fun and educational, and we have a wonderful guest presenter today. So, Chris, do you want to
Well,
introduce
I'll just do a short introduction. Claire, we met through LinkedIn, just a connection with a connection. We connected, and here she is, designing neuro inclusion through neurological safety. And on today's topic, I will intentionally be taking a little bit of a back seat. And I will admit that I had to look up AUDHD, which is autism spectrum disorder, along with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, in the same person. I had to look that up, and I also had to look up HSP, which is a highly sensitive person. And Claire, you had I saw a link somewhere that I got from you where you can test yourself. And I took a test, and I am in fact a highly sensitive person. So Claire, why don't you say a little bit about yourself?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you, Nancy and Chris, for having me here. I could talk all day about neurological safety and inclusion, but I'll just say a little bit about my journey of sort of getting to this place. I was a corporate employee for a long time, and really at around 2007, I had two kids, 3 and 5 years old. And it all became too much, what I call the constructive work. And I needed the legal advice then around inclusion. I tried for a year to negotiate to be able to continue to work from home part-time. And my job, I did a little audit of my job. It was 90% on the phone for the phone company. And we were selling the technology that enabled people to work from home, yet I wasn't able to work from home. And this was, a bit of a values clash, but I didn't have, that's what I labeled it at the time, but I didn't have language around inclusion. I didn't have language around highly sensitive person. I stumbled into that about 10 years ago. And it was only 2 years ago that I stumbled into an autism diagnosis. And so all of a sudden, and you can see this in real time, you have on the screen Happy Space there, which is the podcast that I host around designing neuro inclusion. But it started out as Happy Space Podcast, HSP, because it was really designed for the highly sensitive person, all around things that the highly sensitive person can do to be more successful in this world, but also an invitation. And this was in episode 2, where I interviewed Kay Sargent from HOK, global architecture and design firm, and also leading work on neuro-inclusive design in the workplace. They have a beautiful book on that. Early on in the podcast, it was calling in design to create more hospitable space, culture, and experience. Because when it comes to disability, and I'll talk about hidden disabilities in a second, I don't consider myself disabled by autism until the environment renders me so. So I take issue with autism spectrum disorder. I take issue with attention ADHD with disorder. I would love to replace that with difference, because if we unpack that a little bit, we see incredible strengths in some areas, which become weaknesses in other contexts. So I would like to really just maybe introduce myself by saying I was an evolution through designing out of the corporate world and fully into entrepreneurship, because there I was designed out essentially, and leaning into a business that I had started a couple of years prior and had fallen in love with. I used to go to people's homes and organize. I was sort of a Marie Kondo in Canada before Marie Kondo came along. And then I realized the corporate world needed me. And I was, for 20 years, looking at the organization and structure around time, space, and our possessions so that you can live with greater ease and really a calmer nervous system. So while my career looks kind of unconnected at times, there's a through line in advocacy all the way through my career and into designing for humanity, which really culminates now in the work I do with Happy Space and designing neuro inclusion. And also, I spend my time supporting the Canadian implementation of the Hidden Disability Sunflower Program, which that sunflower symbol, if you might have seen it before, it's possibly because you were traveling. It started in an airport in Gatwick Airport in 2016 and now is all over the world. And I'm growing the program here in Canada. If you see someone wearing that symbol, they are choosing to disclose in a subtle way that there is a non-visible condition or a disability at play, and they might need more time, patience, and certainly your kindness.
And I learned about it when I was getting my certification in ISO 3415 from Venture Collective, which is based in Canada. And we learned about it there. So when I saw the sunflower on your profile. I went, "Hey, I know what that is."
Yeah,
It sounds like a wonderful program, and I would be very happy to see some of it going on in the US, where maybe it is, and I just don't
it
know
is. It
know
is.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It is as
yeah.
well. There's numerous airports and even some government organizations were part of it. I have to check if they still are. But there are, yeah, organizations all over the US and zoos and venues. So yeah, there's a lot going on in the States too. You can check on if anybody's curious to find out, the website is hdsunflower.com. You can choose your country and you can find the map and just put in your location and kind of search around and you'll be able to see sunflowers come up.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's start with the reassure part of DEI for real. And oops, I gotta move this little thing in my screen here. Um, so I would like to, at this point, reassure our audience members that neurodiversity, I have to get this out of the way. Minimize. There we go. Um, Neurodiversity is not necessarily a burden. 1 in 5 people are neurodivergent. 1 in 6 live with some kind of a disability, and building flexibility into the workplace, and Claire's going to talk more about this, drives retention and unleashes untapped potential. This is one definition of neurodivergence. I'm sure that there are many. And according to, this was an article that I found in Harvard Business Reviews, they have an article called Neurodiversity as a Competitive Advantage. And they say that depending on someone's differences, their neuro differences, they may understand complex mathematics, they may recognize obscure patterns in data, memorize intricate details, they might have a really high level of concentration, um, extra measure of imagination. So all that is on the good side of being neurodivergent. According to, and I looked up a couple of the stats, According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, 38% of people ages 16 to 64 with a disability were employed, in contrast to 65% of those without a disability. And Nancy wanted to talk about being proactive versus reactive.
Well, I think most people that have been on these probably have heard me say this ad nauseum, but there is always a lot that you can do proactively to seek out individuals who fit the criteria for performing the essential functions of any job. And I think that's what the study you were just talking about is also addressing, that it's the ADA standard. If you look at the Americans with Disabilities Act, obviously, Claire, you're in you're in Canada, so you can talk a little bit about how it is in Canada. But it's really about looking for people who can perform the job, not necessarily who you think can perform the job. And so it's not just also reacting to waiting for people to tell you that they need an accommodation, for example. It's a delicate dance there, and I could do a whole course just on that. But it's recognizing in most states at this point in the US, the moment someone explains to you that they have some sort of condition that might be affecting their ability to do the job, you're supposed to start that interactive dialogue to see what's needed to still perform. So there's a lot of process along the way of where you recruit, and you've heard me say this with all types of protected classes, but it's looking beyond what you think is the quote right person for any job and opening your mind. And I think it's what you're hitting on as well, Chris, and I'm sure Claire, you have a lot to say about this. We're missing opportunities. And as someone who's had several people in my life who have a variety of disabilities, I think of, in particular, my cousin who had Down syndrome, and how in the old days, right, when we were children, she might not have been given opportunities, but she ended up having a fairly, what we would consider normal life, whatever that really means. But she was able to get a job. She got support. She lived on her own for a very long time. And all of that was possible because instead of being reactive and fearful around a diagnosis, there was this proactive discussion of what can you do? What do I need done? And how do we come together to make sure that in a workplace that is being fully explored for the opportunities.
And Claire, I had this in my notes, that productivity is personal. And can you talk a little bit about how about designing environments where
Yeah.
where these neurodivergent people can and sensitive people um, can thrive?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, working with people both in their homes and their offices for about 20 years, looking at how people preferred to set things up, sometimes supporting them, sometimes in their own way. It was evident to me there was no one way to do things. I had to spend time with someone and listen and learn and ask questions to uncover what somebody was aiming for, what they would feel good in. I developed a model. I called it the four-step plan to get organized. And plan was prioritize. So you have to understand what you wanted to do, but also how you wanted to feel. And it was really important to me that someone could articulate how they wanted to feel in a space, and they would translate that. That was essentially, if you were designing a room, that would be your vision board. What materials, what colors? Clearly, this pink is really important to me. And you can find yourself really quickly in a Zoom room. It's got a functional benefit as well. So, but it was just so obvious to me that I mean, I would just take a pair of jeans. I'll give you one silly example, right? Take a pair of jeans. How do you fold? How do you put away your jeans or a pair of pants? Fold?
Yeah.
Okay. Nancy, what do you do with your jeans?
Yep, it's a nice little square. I like my things in little squares.
In little squares, right? Some people want to hang them. Some people want to hang them on the long hangers. Some people, have you seen the trend in retail where they were hanging them kind of sideways for a while on a hanger so the tag would show? There are probably 10 different ways you could store a pair of jeans. So if an organizer was to go into a place and say, I know how you should do your clothes, it could be absolutely foreign and uncomfortable. And that's one type of garment. But think about information management. Think about filing. So I will work on filing systems with people. Um, how do you get around, Chris?
I walk and I drive.
You drive. What do you drive?
I drive a Subaru, an Outback.
An Outback. Would you call that a car? An automobile? A vehicle? Your
I call,
Subaru? So
yeah, I call it a station wagon.
yeah. So everybody has a way of holding on to information and remembering where it is, which is also vastly different. And whether you're neurodivergent or not, this will apply. So productivity as personal applies to everyone. What I will say from my own learning journey and where autism and ADHD come into play, ADHD, I can give you all the 20 names for cars. Like, let's go through and have all the different ways you could talk about a car. But I will also think, you know what? I'm going to think about this in my filing system. I want it to be C for car because that's the most clear to me. It's not going to be A for automobile because that maybe if I was from another generation, it might have been. So it's got to then map to your internal, your way of mapping the world and sort of acknowledge your own creativity or propensity to name things differently. So I might also have a folder that says automobile, but remember you said you were going to call this car, so go check that folder. you know so I have in my digital system, which mirrors my physical system, note, go check this file, like the yellow pages would have back in the day. It would
Yeah,
have the, you're looking for garage, but you can also find car repair. So
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So this is our big section today, educate. So we're going to start with, I'm going to start with you, Nancy. Um, the legal risks
The
and
legal
highlight,
risks
yeah.
of I'm
Go.
assuming you mean of not addressing
Yes, yes, of not,
neurodiversity.
of
So
yes, yes.
so
Where,
that and I think that's the best way to look at it is there's a huge legal risk in not embracing the diversity of humans. That's again what we've been talking about for the past almost 2 years. And one of the things I look at with neurodiversity is very similar to the structure that we use with all employees. And I think it's again, it's my favorite way of navigating this is to just say, here's the standard. What is it you need to meet the standard? So, Claire, the examples you were giving, like automobile versus car in a filing system, it's so easy these days with technology. Like maybe you do have car and Chris has it under automobile and you both work in the same space. But you know what's really easy to do? Share that information of here's my filing system. And Chris, if you're ever covering for me or you need something out of my file system, here's the key. It's a
Mhm.
really simple fix. And this is what I get, as you can tell, very frustrated because employers are still operating largely as though we're all functioning in this assembly line kind
Yes.
of workplace. And more, especially in the US and probably most of North America, right? And so Canada as well, would
Yeah.
be a lot of knowledge work. And with knowledge work, it's so broad. You can't, for example, systemize grief. You can maybe take parts of it in a funeral home and say, here's what we need to do the paperwork. But when somebody's sitting across from you that's in need, you don't want to go, okay, it takes 15 minutes to do that paperwork. Get them out of there, right? And that's what we need to be looking at is bringing that human aspect back. And we'll be talking
Yeah.
about how AI and other technology can do that. I'm not anti-technology or AI, but I think we have to look at the legal risk of getting sued is that you're not acknowledging that humans are individuals and you're
Mhm.
making decisions based on appearance and assumption that will almost always get you in trouble.
Well, and if I may add one thought, there's this bias called false consensus effect, where we're predisposed to think that the way I think about things should be the way you guys think about things. And because of that, and being a productivity person, I was always concerned about efficiency and effectiveness and enjoyment. But efficiency is the top one that gets praised the most, and effectiveness is maybe tier two sometimes. And I think bias is one of those tools that tries to give us an answer quickly, but the more we can stay curious, and this requires patience. And in a hustle culture, we're not invited to slow down. So this is kind of the root of the problem, is that we need to anchor in, what else do I need to know about this? There needs to be another questioning of self and of the situation to be able to gather enough information to then move forward. But if we're in a rush to fill in the blanks, then we're going to discard opportunity.
And I think it's the perfect lead in to the policies, practices, and procedures, because look, I've been guilty of it myself. There are certain aspects of my business when I started out that I was new at it. So I borrowed somebody else's template to get myself started, right? And then I realized pretty quickly that didn't work for my unique business. And so what we're really talking about is getting clear on what your values are, getting clear on what are the essential functions of every single job in your organization, and where can you be flexible? Where might there be sharing responsibility? Because different people might do certain aspects of the same job very uniquely, but that doesn't mean it's right or wrong. And so figuring out what's the result we're trying to get, and then engineering, or reverse engineering to get that, gives a lot of freedom in the process. And yes, I understand that you have to be mindful of time, energy, money, all of that, but there is a way to do it and be more inclusive. And that's again why we continue to do this series. And
Well,
Claire, I
and
see you wanting to jump in.
oh
No,
yeah.
I'm appreciating what you're saying, because that invitation and then weaving it into the processes make sure it becomes integral into how you think about doing things, and not an afterthought.
And I have a tiny example of policies, practices, and procedures, which is one of the things that our inclusion assessment measures, along with management and culture. And I had a contract job for a while where I was a writer, and I wrote several websites per week, and I interviewed people. And the way that it was set up, it was a great big room, like a cafeteria with little cubes in it. So all these little cubes. So there's all kinds of noise. And when I write, I like silence. Some people write with music. I write with silence. And my particular little cube that I was working out of was right outside the break room. So people would come out of the break room. They're talking about the Vikings game. They're talking about whatever. And I wore earplugs. And I had to build, like, I put a big cardboard thing to block the visual so that I didn't see people. And even then, it was distracting and hard. And if I could have worked at home in my silence where I like to work, it would have been great, but that wasn't an option. So, these noisy open plan offices are really difficult for some people. And that gets us to the three pillars of neurological safety, which is going to be Claire. This was new stuff to me. So
Oh,
here they
yeah,
go.
I'm happy to share, but I have to laugh because I'm at home right now, but my partner just came home and turned the coffee machine on. And one of the things I will not miss is the coffee machine. I don't mind cats. This is Theo. Is this Theo? No, this is Ellie. I think you've had both cats pop in. This is Elliot. There's a cat carpet on my desk because priorities. But sound for me too is a big part of the reason why I didn't thrive in an open concept office. And it was also the commute. the actual physical ordeal and the soundscape within the transit system, it was not designed for me. But so we introduced the concept of neurological safety, which is a concept I've been working on for about 5 years now, and adding to it. We know through the pandemic, we learned of the need or reinforced the need for physiological safety. So a clean air, clean water, clean surfaces. We talk about the need for psychological safety and the importance of being able to speak up without fear of recrimination. That also has a role to play in conversations around disclosure, for sure. And then the third one, what we need to have is neurological safety, conditions that enable us to keep calm and carry on. And the example I gave of being designed out of work is my nervous system couldn't handle what it was being asked to tolerate every day. And I effectively was designed out. But there's three key elements to neurological safety. The first one is sensory support. So we're talking about a noisy office. We could be talking about light. Anybody got an issue? Throw in the chat if you've got a problem with LED lighting
Oh,
in an office right
oh,
now.
absolutely.
Right. Nancy had on in her screen, we could see behind her, there was a ceiling fan over her head. And she said, don't worry, I'm going to turn this off because that could be a visual distraction that somebody might have. If you ever see somebody in a Zoom room and they're on a treadmill, does that not makes me feel nauseous? I don't
Or
know.
even in the car, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes in the car.
Yeah. So the whole sensory experience can really, depending, and now it varies by sense. You can have someone sensitive to light, but not sensitive to sound, or sensitive to rap music, but not opera. So,
Or vice
and she's
versa.
not, so it's very looking at the sensory experience. It's very nuanced and it's not necessarily predictable. Um, Cognitive kindness is the second pillar. And this is talking about things like plain language communications. It's talking about proactive communication. It's talking about having the right information at your fingertips at the right pace, at the right time, in the right format, so you can move forward with ease, or having it be completely intuitive. I love when a system is intuitive, but how many times in a day now do you run into a new environment and you're just like, I'm stumped. I'm stumped. Go to a self-checkout and it's like, I remember going to a self-checkout and trying to get to the end and only then afterwards seeing we do not accept cash. Like, so cognitive kindness. I was in IKEA last night. I said, I have a closet of 36 inches and I have another of 47. Oh, I'm only trained in centimeters because it's Canada. And Canadians of a certain age are messed up because I speak inches and centimeters, depending on what it is we're talking about. So cognitive kindness means that you're thinking about how someone processes information. And the last piece, and there's some overlap with psychological safety here, I call it emotional engagement. This is the language that you choose to use. Do you say rudeness will not be tolerated, or we treat each other with kindness?
Right.
How you say something, your prosody, your prose, your choice of words, and your posture. I remember 23 years old making a complaint about sexual harassment back in the 90s, early 90s, before the policy was even dry. And the director of HR met me like this.
Mhm.
Really?
Yeah, woman met me like that. After the complaint, 13 other complaints came out. They were not prepared to even know how to handle the conversation and to have any sense of emotional engagement. I was told by my leaders at the time, don't talk about it to anybody. Don't talk about it to anyone. Don't, it's absolutely like, what? Yeah, so the emotional engagement around the experience, there's a lot of opportunity for improvement and warmth there to put people's nervous systems at ease.
And I think you're hitting on something that I talk about also is this, are you there? It's the purpose. Like, are you there to facilitate the result, support the employee so that they can produce that result?
Mhm.
Or are you there to judge and get rid of people, right? And I think that's the other kind of mindset shift, is that if we're looking at how do we get somewhere, not who do we get and who belongs and who doesn't belong. That's what inclusion's all about, is recognizing that we all can have a spot. And
Yeah,
really, in a workplace setting, what we're talking about is, can you produce the result that you agreed to when you took the job? And I
right.
think that's another thing we lose in some of these conversations, is that I often say employment is a partnership, right? You're interviewing the employer when you're in that hot seat, and they're interviewing you. You're looking, can we do something cool together that benefits both of us?
Right.
And so that's where I'm hearing this shift in how we're talking about coming together in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think in a lot of places, unfortunately, people are treated as a commodity. And
Yeah.
it's like, we'll just get another one. We'll just get another one. We'll let you burn out. And then when you're done, we'll just fill you in again with another human. And so I
Or
think,
an AI bot,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Could
And
be.
yeah, so there's a whole other conversation, but I think it's back to patience and values. And when you're interviewing, looking for the values of an organization, because they should then portend into action and behavior and hopefully then become a dialogue. So I didn't share in my introduction. I probably should bump it up to the introduction. I also live with MS, multiple sclerosis. And so
Mm.
autism, I learned about 2 years ago and disclosed on television within 48 hours. That was a very quick learning to sharing the journey. But MS, it took me 7 years before I actually would say it out in a conversation beyond my closest circle. I was afraid no one would hire me. By that time, I was an entrepreneur again. But I look at this all as related, right? We've got a sensitive nervous system. Well, a sensitive nervous system can lead to a chronic level of stress if it's in a difficult environment. Then that leads to inflammation. Then that leads to autoimmune diseases like MS. So I
And
think
you're,
they're very much connected.
They're
I
all
do too.
connected.
And I'm just going to jump in without taking too much time on this, is the other part that you're hitting on is the exacerbation that can occur, and that's a legal
Yes.
risk as well. It's a risk of both FMLA, workers' compensation, and it's also potential setting you up for discrimination. So if you're an employer, that's something else to consider, is that
Mhm.
by not acknowledging what's going on with your individual employees, you might be setting yourself up for a series of claims that could be prevented with some very simple conversation
Mhm. Yeah,
and
that's right.
compassionate conversation.
Well, yeah, and watching in Canada, I've watched closely, and in the US to some extent, the return to office conversation. And numerous people, I've done a lot of radio interviews on the topic about the need or the drive to have people back in the office and the reluctance from the workforce, and then people stepping in and saying, well, wait a minute, I need an accommodation for this. And I think what often people are afraid of is abuse of people just saying, you know what, that doesn't work for me. I don't want to do it. But let's dig a little deeper and understand. And maybe people are like me, didn't have the words for autism, didn't know that my sensory sensitivity. I kind of came to understand it's on the higher side. But leaning into understanding more about autism, it's like, oh, I guess it's like in the top 1 to 2% of sensory sensitivity. So that's a different thing, and you don't know necessarily. So one of the things I think is important in this conversation is you can't always expect the employee to come in with, here's the book on me, because we're actually figuring it out. There are chapters that we're just driving into on our own, yet the burden is on us to be like, well, I gotta tell you all the things that I need. But some people, they don't know what they need yet. So a sense of experimentation and curiosity, let's try and find what works, could be helpful.
And that's why I usually say, here's the standard. What do you need to meet the standard when people
Mhm.
are not? Because the other thing you don't want to get into, and I think employers are afraid to approach employees for that reason, is you don't want to go to somebody and say, so, Chris, you do A, B, and C. Have you ever thought you might be X and go get an exam or
Yeah.
evaluation? So
Yeah.
that's like the last thing you want to do, because that under the ADA is also protected, because you may be perceiving someone to have a disability.
Mhm.
And so there's a delicate dance here, but that's why I use that standard. It opens the conversation and gets the employee to do what you're talking about, Claire, to
Yeah.
start assessing. And what I tell people also is you will learn a lot about your employee's commitment to the job in that conversation. Because an employee that really wants to do a good job is going to go, well, let me think about that. I'm not
Mhm.
really sure. And it starts the conversation. An employee that's kind of unwilling, and this is a broad generalization, will often push back and say, well, it's because you do this, you do this, you do this, and you need to give me that. That's a different, right? Like, and so again, it all can be addressed in conversation, but it's not going to be a one and done. And people often will, in the workplace, especially managers, try to figure it all out. Maybe they feel like they have to figure it all out first and then go and approach somebody else with the solution, which doesn't work. It's
Mhm.
just like who hasn't been in that breakup, right?
Well, yeah, I think that I trained as an executive coach back in 2015, 2016, and just the idea of anchoring in questions,
Mhm.
and staying curious and also being unattached to an outcome. So
Mhm.
setting an intention for sure is we want to see this work out. We don't understand fully what the obstacles are on both sides and what the opportunities are. So let's explore this together with the intention that we're going to try to find something that works for both of us.
Right.
And then you've got a healthy energy around it. I think what you're talking about though, when you often we come to these conversations when we're already hurt, when we've
Right.
been struggling. Like I said, I advocated for a year before I actually start my podcast by talking about how I tumbled down a flight of stairs at home getting ready for work one morning. That's how I learned that Birkenstocks and pantyhose don't mix.
Oh no.
Oh yeah. 13 stairs. And I was like, oh, and I found bruises for the next 2 weeks. And I thought, this is a very clear signal that this construct of life and work is not working. So you haven't been successful for a year of advocacy, no performance issues, just false consensus effect. I can remember the quote, I can work anywhere. I can work on the back of a pizza box, she said. I'm like, well, bully for you. I was like, so yeah, sometimes you have to slowly introduce people into thinking that the productivity is personal is a really powerful statement. I also have another one, autonomy is for adults. So
I I'm curious about this one.
mm,
Incongruent experiences create a struggle to comprehend. Can you talk about that?
yeah, have oh so let me this is personal now. My daughter, don't tell her I'm talking about her. She's beautifully conscientious in her first area of work. And from what I'm feeling is very little direction. She's not given enough information to actually know if she's measuring up. So for somebody who's conscientious and people pleasing and so genuinely striving to do a good job, not sure if you should ask a question. I can think back to my own days when you're new into a role, you're trying to determine the culture, you're trying to do a good job, but you don't even understand what the norm of asking for help is. Is it okay? Can I say I need help? Or am I supposed to deduce it from this? In the absence of very good, clear instructions, simple example, people are floundering, people are spinning thinking that it's too early to ask a question. I should be able to figure this out. I should be able to figure it out. And it may be, I'm the number of people I was coaching that we ended up having a joint conversation with the manager and really working together on improved communications. It's not always the employee. They're really struggling in the absence of clear information.
Well, I had another short example here is that I was in one position where I went to my manager after, you know, maybe a month, maybe more, and I said, what are my professional goals for this role? You know, what would you like to see? And she said, well, that's for you to determine. And I thought, I've never,
Yeah.
usually the manager said these are your things to achieve, you know, in this position. I had never had that happen where they say, oh, you pick your own. And to me, that would have been cognitive. I struggled to comprehend that.
And
Yeah.
that goes back to a legal risk again, too, is that suggests to me that that's an employer or manager that's not that clear on it either. And that's just an invitation for trouble later.
Yeah, well, we did have trouble later, but that's another story.
See, the
Yeah.
invitation was there and it was accepted.
Well, and it's interesting having coached anyone from a new manager to the C-suite. These challenges are at every level and they're not necessarily worked through. And the more senior you are, the more likely you are to have had human support, administrative support as your executive function. And so with that support, people were able to be successful and achieve more, but there's missing pieces in there, and I think that sometimes is borne out by the lack of effective communication down the role and structure, even structure. Like, so I need this report ASAP. Oh, don't give me ASAP. Let's be more specific in our timing. Let's be more clear about what we want.
Is that today or next week or this
Well, and
month?
as yeah, and especially so autism for sure, even ADHD, chunking work, breaking it down and being very clear. Um, with one of my clients, it was we were talking about school work, and it was like I need a measure, 250 words. Okay, perfect. I know how much to give you.
Yeah.
Write for 10 minutes, whatever you put out in 10 minutes, fine. But give me some parameters so I know how to gauge my effort and I know when I can feel good about what I've done.
This one, emotional engagement. I
Mhm.
have another short example. Same job, actually. And I was there, and this was like my first, might have been the first day, might have been the second. And all of a sudden it got really quiet, you know, if there's nobody around. And I went, you know, I just did a little loop around the cubes and nobody was there. And I thought, oh, maybe they all, you know, went somewhere to lunch. And I went down to the company cafeteria and there they all were having lunch. And it's like you didn't think to invite the new person to lunch. And to me, that was just, you know, emotionally repellent.
I spent a long time thinking about the words on this because I think it's not engaging. You're pushed away. It's worse than just being ignored. You're pushed. You're pushed.
It
And
was,
I can tell you that I see this kind of really what it grows into a lot of times in workplaces is bullying. And sometimes it's, somebody's a little different, so or they're new, so they're not in the clique yet. And look, if you've got cliques, danger. I'm just going to tell you that as an employer. I'm not saying break them up. I'm not saying people can't have some personal relationships, but if you see those cliques kind of gossiping together, doing all of those things, I can tell you these are early signs of potential problem because I had a situation with someone that others didn't like, kind of started putting in complaints about this person because he was weird and he was doing certain things. And it turned out that later that he needed an accommodation. Maybe his social skills were not what some people expected, but he was a really hard worker and a lovely human being, and people were ganging up on him because he was different, and that just
oh,
invited a complaint. They thought
oh.
it was going to be the complaint on the other side, right? With the people that were complaining about him. And I said, I think you need to look at what's really going on here. And ultimately, some accommodation needed to occur.
And I'm keeping an eye on the time here.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how this lack of neurological safety leads to exclusion. What happens?
Yeah. So you imagine somebody's coming into a space or a process and they're feeling pretty good. I would call that nervous system is regulated. It's working. Things are working well. They're not distressed. And then you have opportunities that cause that stress, whether it's the LED light bulb, whether it's the noise in the background, whether it's the gossiping, whether it's the bullying behavior, whether it's the information didn't make sense. And now somebody's becoming, oh gosh, I'm feeling like this is not as comfortable. And there's a journey towards being upset, irritated, potentially angry. And there's a couple of different options. We can have shut down, and this is thinking about autism in particular. We can have shut down or we can have meltdown. And one seems to be expressed. I think they're both going on internally and externally, but expressed internally, it's a quietening and a detachment. A lack of engagement with the other person, whereas meltdown is very expressive, and anger is coming out, voices might be raised, a physicality. And if we're successful, we can bring somebody through that, or the environment can bring somebody through that to be more regulated and to be able to recover, to be able to receive support. But there's a journey here, and in any place, somebody might just go, I'm out. This is it. This place is not for me. I quit. Those are your I quit moments, or I'm not shopping here anymore, or you're done. You're done to me, and I think we have an opportunity every time to notice a difficult situation and say, what off ramps did we invite someone to take here? And what can we do to make them turn those around and invite people back? And also then learn what we can do about our space, culture, or experience to improve that safety.
And
And I
so
have
much of it comes down to communication.
it does, and the other thing I hear in this, the two things in particular is it was something you said about the process. So I thought that was really important, right? Is recognizing that you don't have to be responsible for the human being. Like you don't have to parent them. That's not your role. But if you can look, maybe using things like the Spectra diversity assessment, right? You may be able to identify where your system is producing this kind of result. That's what we're talking about is you have control, and you've heard me say this a lot for those of you that have been on these. You have control over your systems. You don't necessarily have control over the people. And that's the thing that's so backwards is so often we want to control the people because we think that will control the process, but it's the other way around. Look at how your process is producing these results with individuals, and that will often get you where you want to go.
Oh,
Yeah, you're
that is,
precursors.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is exactly what we're going to talk about now. So, activate. So, optimizing talent. So, Nancy, audit your three Ps using the hack test. Can you talk about that briefly?
Just very briefly, it's a standard that I have been using now for the past couple of years to get my clients to think about, is the result that or the process, it's really the process, what you're doing, the action, whatever you're doing, is it humane? Are you considering the humans in this process? Or
Mhm.
are you treating them like, well, I wouldn't even say AI bots because you're going to treat an AI bot sometimes differently and more human than a machine. Then is it affordable, right? You do have to look at the time, money, and energy costs. So when I'm talking about affordability, it's looking there as well. And that's part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's why you have a request for an accommodation, and there is an out for a business if it's the accommodation that you need is too expensive to
Mhm.
implement. You don't have to necessarily do it, but it's like, don't make the decision before you've done the investigation. And then quick is, you don't want to be too quick, right? You don't want to have those snap judgments, but you also don't want it to fester for too long. Because, like I said, I've seen this over and over where it starts with what looks like just a little bullying, right? And then it keeps growing and growing. And usually, if there's one person being bullied in the organization, it's going to be another. and another. There's this ongoing cycle. And why? Because the system is allowing that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
So that's why I keep coming back to the system.
Good segue into practice. The practices part of policies, practices, and procedures. Obviously, I have a bias here that unless you measure it or assess it in some way, you don't know what you don't know. And for insight into this, I'd like to quote a colleague of mine, Grant Harris. And he says, as a practical matter, most workplace systems push leaders to ask who failed. Better leaders ask what part of the process made this outcome possible. And that question matters because many workplace problems get mislabeled as people problems early on.
Mhm.
But the problem could be in the process. So if this was a an iceberg, we talk about the iceberg in other terms of diversity. So there's the little part at the top, and maybe that's the visible friction. But what's missed is all the stuff that is below it, the larger part of the iceberg. And that's the conditions, that's the policies, practices, and procedures. So what you need clarity about success and decision making, which reduces misunderstandings. Managers should check their assumptions consistently before labeling those employees. Unclear communication fosters misinterpretation and misjudgment, and clear expectations. Once again, communication improves, your talent. It improves the output, and it improves trust or creates trust. So, Claire, we're to you. The environment. What can they do about low cost environment neurological safety options?
Well, let me just say that I hope it's low cost, but please pay attention to your lighting right now because there's a big, massive effort to move more and more fixtures to LED lighting. And for many people, the light sensitivity and beyond, everybody's affected negatively by a lot of the LED lighting that's being put in place right now. I
Really?
wrote yeah, I spent quite a bit of time putting together a Substack article. If anybody's interested, it's Happy Space Design on Substack and Blinded by the Light. There's some serious impact out of the blue light that comes from LED light, which is very short wavelength light. And it's like, you know how lasers concentrate the light, and we
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
want to shine that light at a pilot, for example. We know that's illegal. Well, our headlights are becoming more like lasers. The amount of the LED fixtures that we have are giving short light. And just very quickly, we've got cells in our eyes which process light from above. It ties to our clock in our brains that set our rhythms of every organ. And what's happening is number one, our clock is being thrown off. Number two, our mitochondrial function in every cell is being thrown off. So we're less productive. Every cell is less productive. And in the light sensitive, it's triggering pain reception. And it might take a while for it to show up, but it'll be a headache. It could be a migraine. It could be slightly delayed. So if you start to notice in an office, you're just like, oh gosh, these lights are uncomfortable, you may be dosing on toxic light. And so please take a look at the lighting. Please take a look at the article I read and what I wrote. And what you want to do is make sure your lighting, because it's so pervasive,
Yeah.
is going to be safe. So you're going to, at minimum, you're going to have an incandescent light source when you have other light to have full spectrum. Watch out for anything that's advertising daylight indoors. We're not meant for that much light. We can have task lighting, but we don't want that to be our ambient light. Second one is noise.
Oh,
Really, really allow people all the noise canceling that they can. But beyond that, let's think about creating the culture that supports respect for quiet spaces. So let's have your cafeteria, but let's not put the highly sensitive person right outside the break room. Let's allow for some design of space for the people that are like, you know what, that buzz works for my brain versus the people that are just like, no, I can't think anymore. My brain shuts down. And there is science that shows that autistic people are not likely to habituate, get used to that and just be fine after a while. So depends what the sound is. I've got quite used to the sound of an MRI now, but I will never get used to working in a loud office with start stop noises. The third one to really pay attention to is scent. What's your policy on scent? Because there are a lot of people that have really difficult reactions to scent. A lot of the chemicals can cause really adverse, bad situations in people, and they then can no longer participate. So think about what you wear. Think about what you wash your clothes in. No scented fabric dryer sheets. They make your clothes, they make your towels crap for absorbency anyway. So be really thoughtful about what you're consuming and what you're sharing. And when you're designing that environment, those would be the top three things I would say to think about from a design perspective. Ergonomics, absolutely hands down the next one.
And I just want to throw in there that this may sound like a lot for some of you, right? That are maybe in management, maybe you don't have as much control over the design, et cetera. But what we're not necessarily saying, you have to go and do all of this afternoon. It's really calling this into your awareness so that you can start ticking away at the things that are having you lose great talent.
Yeah, and listen, I think the big thing is when somebody comes to you with a concern that something's not working, lean in with curiosity to find out more because I'll bet you they're representative of a number of other people with exactly the same thing that haven't got the courage yet, found the words, figured out that it's safe to do so. Lean into every issue I mean, ergonomics only became a thing when the lawsuits came around carpal tunnel and lower back issues. Now we know a lot more. We pay attention to it. Well, I'm telling you right now, light is the next one that's going to be it's happening that it's starting to be addressed, but you're going to see greater presence and greater well-being if you get the light right in your office.
And Claire put the link to that article. It's in the chat somewhere. I saw it. Can you talk about training supervisors and leadership in how to have collaborative conversations rather than defensive HR escalations and bad meetings?
Yeah. Is that for Nancy?
No,
Or
that's for
that's
you.
me? Okay, so again, it's anchoring in curiosity. So if you go into a meeting, maybe you have the points that you want to make and that you've thought are important to you to say, but if you can go in and go in with an attitude that says, I want to learn what's going on here and how does this affect your ability to get to those tasks that we
Curiosity.
both agreed upon
Yeah.
in our work contract. This is what you're here to do. What's getting in the way and what can I do to help? I call them speed bumps and roadblocks. What are we going to do to minimize those so that you can spend less energy actually completing those tasks?
Okay. So we have our last section today is how to be leaders. And this is where we want to open it up for questions. We don't usually do this as questions, but we are today. So do you have questions for Claire or for Nancy or for me about ADA, remote versus in office, performance management? Any questions about any of those? Just unmute yourself or put them in the chat.
I want to just comment on Leandra Stanley's comment about disability is not a bad word. Absolutely. I hope I didn't give the impression that it's a bad word. I think disorder might not be the right word for the autism disorder and ADHD, but disability is very much a play, and it can vary. It can be there persistent all the time, or it could be episodic, and we do need to have different ways of supporting people with different kinds of disability and embrace the fact that that's very important to do so. So I hope that helps. I hope I didn't give that impression.
Nancy, do you have anything to add about ADA compliance or any questions? Let's see
Well,
if there's.
I think I've hit on it a lot. I'll just, end again that we're looking for who can perform the essential functions of the job, which requires you to go back and consider what's essential to perform that job. And one of the key things I can tell you that I listen for and look for in all job descriptions and job postings is, and other duties as assigned. Right? I can tell you right there that's not clear. And you're probably then excluding a lot of people because you haven't thought through what's really needed. So take that time. And especially when you're considering that, I hear it over and over. Oh, I can't find good workers. It's so hard to hire people. Well, maybe look at what you're doing in your systems, not necessarily intentionally. You might not be a bad person. I'm not saying that. It's just our systems have a tendency, as I talk about in my upcoming book, they have a tendency to produce results that we're not really looking for.
Well, we are at, according to my phone, we are at time. So thank you so much, Claire, for joining us today. Yeah, it's great to have a guest with really an expert opinion in so many ways. And anything you'd like to add, Nancy or Claire?
Just thank
Otherwise,
you.
we'll see you in September.
Yeah,
Conflict.
come find me. I'm open for conversations about this and delighted to take this message far and wide. So if it's helpful to anyone in their organization to have a deeper dive into neurological safety and look at what the opportunities are, I can make a lot of time for that. So please reach
Okay.
out.
And I put the all the contact information and resources in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you
So
so much, Nancy and Chris, for having me. It was wonderful.
yes,
Thank you. It was
yes.
great having you here.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.